Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. We're just going to let a couple more people trickle in and then we'll get started. Okay, I'm gonna kick it off. Thank you all so much for joining tonight for our panel, Circular Production, Reimagining Our Relationships with Waste. I'm Joanna Reynolds, the Associate Director of Made in NYC. And for those of you who aren't familiar, Made in NYC is a nonprofit local branding initiative that supports New York City's vibrant manufacturing and maker community. We help local manufacturers and makers to grow through marketing and branding resources, valuable skills building opportunities, and access to a supportive community of peers. Made in NYC is a membership-based initiative with over 1,400 member businesses, making everything from hot sauce to handbags from the Bronx to Staten Island. Made in NYC is an initiative of the Pratt Center for Community Development, a community-driven planning and development organization that works for a more just and sustainable New York City, and that is a part of Pratt Institute. You can find out more about Made in NYC and search our member directory and look at all of the work that we do at madeinnyc.org. Local manufacturing that incorporates the creative reuse and repurposing of spent and dead stock materials offers an innovative contribution to combating climate change. So tonight, we're hosting a dynamic conversation between designers and makers who are reimagining our collective relationship with waste through their manufacturing processes, moving towards a circular production and conscious consumption model. Before I introduce our moderator for tonight's conversation, I'd like to thank our sponsor for this event, Goldman Sachs, whose support made this event possible. So now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Charlotte McCurdy, who will take it from here. Charlotte McCurdy is an interdisciplinary designer and researcher whose work focuses on making existential threats such as climate change more tractable through design. Based in New York City, McCurdy partnered with the One-on-One Initiative with the support of Swarovski, the UN Office for Partnerships, and the Slow Factory Foundation. She is a member of the Alternative Thinkers Collective and is a member of the New Museum's cultural incubator, New Inc. She is a 2019 Pop Tech Fellow and teaches industrial design at the Rhode Island School of Design and sustainable design at Pratt Institute. Now, I'll pass it to Charlotte.
Thank you so much, Joanna. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really excited to dig into this conversation with Ashwin and Ashira. I'm gonna start out by sharing my screen because we have some images of three of our work, and I'm going to similarly do some bios and then hand it off and let each of these guys introduce their work, just to give us some context to ground our sort of more dialogue-based conversation about circular production that's gonna follow. So we're gonna spend a few minutes just giving you guys context on our various practices, and then we'll dig into a conversation and then jump into a question answer segment at the end where we can sort of all explore these themes together. Okay, so if I'm doing this right, let's see if that looks good. Oh, there we go. Hi, everybody. All right, so I'm gonna start with Ashira. Ashira Israel is the founder of Insect Design. She's an artist, architectural designer, fabricator, and professor who lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. She received her Bachelor's of Architecture from Pratt Institute and an Associate's in Fashion Design from the Fashion Institute of Technology. Her passion lies in working in between the fields of architecture and art, blurring the boundaries of the disciplines she was classically trained in. Ashira's hands-on design practice is critical to her creation process. And Ashira, I'm just going to go through some slides here, and I'd love if you could give a little bit more fulsome introduction to your practice and maybe draw out a little bit how circularity plays into it to give us some context on the following conversation.
Sounds good. Okay. So should I go through each piece and talk about it now, or do you want to just go through them first?
Oh, I think we're going to spend about just 5 minutes each, sort of giving some background for those on the call who don't know about each of our practices. So just a quick intro, just for a quick snapshot of what insect design is and does, and maybe a little bit about how circularity plays into it.
Okay. So insect design was founded about 10 years ago, and it happened, I guess, yeah, after graduating Pratt and doing architecture and realizing that I actually really loved working with my hands and designing on a more human scale, working directly with materials. And I think when I left architecture school, I just felt like I wanted the control of not only designing things, but also being able to work out every single detail with my own two hands. And so furniture kind of was the natural progression towards that and at the scale that I could work at. And I really fell in love with, like, and this kind of started in school actually with a materials and methods class, like working on my first piece of furniture there. But I really fell in love with working in a shop environment versus an office environment, working with my hands, working with the materials. And I always felt like to be a truly great architect, I would have to start with learning the fundamentals of how things were really made, which you don't really learn in architecture school, unfortunately. There's just so much ground to cover and not enough time. So my deep dive into furniture became an obsession on trying to learn how to build things masterfully. And at some point, it just continued to grow, and my love for building and my curiosity for building just continued to evolve. And a lot of the pieces I make mix materials like concrete, wood, and metal. This is an example of a mix of concrete, wood, and metal. There's a piece of box elder, and it's surrounded on both sides by white concrete, and there's a piece of brass in the center of it. So always my heart has been in sustainability and trying to create pieces of furniture that were not disposable, that were pieces that I would hope my clients would love and want to live with and cherish, and that would become heirloom pieces that they would be proud to pass down to their children or loved ones. And in that regard, I felt like what I was doing was helping lead a movement in sustainability and sort of helping educate clients about really falling in love with the pieces that you keep in your home and not just being wasteful and going with what's a cool fad or X, Y, and Z and getting something cheap that's going to break, but rather trying to make an investment in something that would only get better with time, and reconnecting the story of the things that you keep in your home to that of maybe our grandparents, where, you know, people would save up for furniture and then they would keep it, and furniture was built to last. It wasn't meant to be disposable. It wasn't meant to be thrown out on the side of the street, like you see today so often in New York City. And as time went on, I tried to delve more into sustainability within the work we did. So not only creating pieces that were timeless and that could be passed down, but also starting to look at who I could work with, who was a, you know, lumber supplier that had responsible practices, and what could I do with the lumber afterwards, that was like scrap, little bits and leftover pieces. And now the practice has shifted a lot more, And actually, since COVID, I've teamed up with a woman named Megan Offner who runs a company called New York Heartwoods in Kingston. And I had been getting lumber from her over the last 5 or 6 years because her practices are the most sustainable practices that I've found in the lumber industry. She typically works with homeowners or with local people to take down trees that need to be taken down for various reasons, and mills the wood, kiln dries it herself, and then uses the wood for furniture. So she was selling lumber actually in the beginning, but now also doing furniture. So now I'm working with her, and a lot of the projects that we are doing together, it's a whole tree project. So it's like a homeowner has a tree that needs to come down on their property for, various reasons. Either there's rot or decay, or they're doing an extension and they have to take down a tree that's in the way. So we take the tree down, we mill it depending on the type of furniture they may want to use to make out of the tree afterwards. And then we kiln dry it, bring it back to our studio, and then make a collection of furniture normally out of that because there's so much wood. And then in addition to that process, we also, the scrap wood that is accumulated at the end of the project ends up helping to heat people's wood burning stoves upstate. A lot of it's delivered to a local bread maker who has a wood burning stove that he has to keep hot for his bread making. So that is getting used. And then the sawdust is delivered to a ceramicist or a horse farm for bedding for the horses, or for like the grounds that the horses walk on. So, that's some of the ways that we've tried to deal with waste and with trying to make sustainable choices for the business. In addition to that, I also plant a tree at the end of the year for every project that we take on. I partnered with a company called One Tree Planted, and you can choose where in the world you want to have the trees planted because they have locations everywhere. But I always choose a different place where it seems like we desperately need trees planted the most, like, for example, the rainforest or California after the wildfires. And so I try to think of the business in terms of, okay, if we're using part of a tree for this project to make this table and bench, then let's plant a tree in its place. So in that aspect, I'm also trying to think about, if I take something, I'm also giving something back in return. And, I hope to just keep building upon all of these structures and finding other ways to be more sustainable and create more of a circular business moving forward as well.
That's awesome. That's perfect. That's great context for this conversation. I'm going to jump quickly to introducing Ashwin, and we'll do the same thing, and then we'll open up the conversation to more questions and dialogue. So Ashwin Gopi is the co-founder and COO of Rise Products. He's an entrepreneur, researcher, and engineer who uses design thinking to fight food waste in Brooklyn. He's the COO of Rise Products and a technology process consultant. He earned his PhD from New York University, where his research focused on labor responses to automation. He holds a master's degree in technology management and his bachelor's in mechanical engineering. His background is in manufacturing and process optimization. All right, Ashwin, tell us about Rise.
Hey, what's up, everyone? So a few years ago, I kind of was faced with this question. We had this grant from NYU when I was a researcher there, and they asked a very simple question. The question was, how can we make our city better? And we started exploring this, and being like someone with a manufacturing background, I started thinking about like, what could we do about the waste that manufacturing produces? And we started by doing like very basic research. Like we went to landfills, and like a lot of New York City's waste ends up in Jersey or in Pennsylvania, sometimes even as far as Virginia. So we travel to these landfills, and then we analyze like what kind of waste was coming out. And one of the waste we discovered was this kind of weird brown homogeneous wet material that was getting dumped in tons each day, and so we followed up on it, and we figured out it was actually the waste product of beer. The beer being like one of the like most produced beverages, in New York City, and there's a heavy concentration of urban breweries in New York City. And the way you make beer is, you boil barley and hops and yeast, but the first step is like you kind of like crush and boil this barley. And what happens is you extract a lot of the sugar, which then gets taken away and gets turned into alcohol. But this fiber and protein is left behind and usually just thrown away. And it costs these brewers actually to throw it. It costs them like 13 cents a pound to throw away. And they produce tons of it each day, and it's really healthy. It's tasty. It's nutritious. It's clean, and instead of throwing it away, we decided, hey, let's like figure out what we could do with this. And since they were just practically giving it away, and so we figured out that there's a lot of applications to this material. It's called spent grain, brewer's spent grain, and there's so many different applications to it. But we figured out that the most valuable application for this material was as food, direct like nutrition for humans. Really, you could make like a lot of different stuff. We tested it in construction material. We tried to make packaging material from this raw material. But we figured out that the best thing to do is to turn it into ingredients. So we developed a process to collect and convert this material. So we work with brewers in Brooklyn. We take their waste, we turn it into an ingredient, which we then sell to food manufacturers, which then gets turned into like a variety of food, all the way from like brownies to bread, to pizza dough. Sometimes even it goes into like breading or fish sticks, and it kind of it's only like 1/3 of the carbohydrates is all purpose flour, but it's got 12 times the fiber, and it's like double the protein. And so it's really it's the most valuable application for something that currently there is just no use for it. And not just there's no use for it, it ends up in the landfill, where it gets converted into methane, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and sometimes it even leaches into the water supply. So to be able to like rescue this and turn it into food, I think one of the most important challenges that we try to solve is logistics, as well as logistics, as well as like the manufacturing process, which we do in a variety of places. Like we do it in Texas, in upstate New York, but also in Long Island City, Queens. And that's where like Made in NYC has been kind of like useful for us, to help us kind of figure out like the branding part of it. And that's why I think it's been very helpful, like talking to them and figuring out like how can we bring this directly to people. So which is why now we are launching like mixes and flour that is directly directly through retail for people, which they can use in their own recipes. We try not to sell food because we are not very good at it, but what we are good at making is this one ingredient. So we really see ourselves as an ingredient company rather than as like a manufacturing company. It's like we think like we're kind of like a new sort of farming, except it's based on it's based on like some sort of like a symbiotic parasite relationship with the industries around us. And that's itself as a new form of farming.
I definitely want to dig into this parasitic relationship you speak of. But just to quickly follow up on Joanna's intro of me, just so people on the call know who I am and I'm not hiding behind anything. I'm Charlotte McCurdy. I do teach in the Sustainable Design certificate program at Pratt. I'm an industrial designer by training, and I make things like this. This is a raincoat made out of a plastic I developed that's made entirely out of marine macroalgae that was carbon negative. And that has led to sort of subsequent projects in the space of the intersection of climate, materials, and design and innovation. I'm really interested in the way we define and hold on to concepts like sustainability. This involved a lot of sort of hands-on experimentation and a lot of sort of exploration of the conceptual, the linguistic ways we hold on to ideas around sustainability. I sort of operate under the hypothesis that a livable future is an experience good, that once you try it on, you'll want it, but you can't know you want it until you get to touch it. And that's part of why designers and makers are so important for this transition we're going through in terms of climate change. This is one such following project where I collaborated with Philip Lim, making sequins out of my algae plastic to make a dress that's sort of trying to engage with these questions of what is a sustainable model? How do we consider climate change? What happens when we center climate and carbon in our design decisions? All right, so that's me. And now the three of us. Thank you guys so much for your intros. I have a lot of questions. I'm very curious. We've been tasked with talking about circular production models. I would be really curious if each of you could sort of offer up your working definition, how you think about circularity. You've given some examples of how it connects to your work, but what's your working definition to sort of, we can set the ground floor of the vocabulary we're going to use here. And if there are any concrete examples within your practice that you want to like just put a real pin in, that maybe is a useful example that other makers and manufacturers on this call maybe could think about and hold on to as they're thinking about how to increase circularity in their own practices. Ashira, can you take us off with what's your working definition of circular production? You're muted.
Okay. I'm going to say, for me, circular production means not taking more than I give. It's just real simple, you know? Like, if I'm going to use wood from a tree for a table, that I'm going to plant a tree in its place to ensure that the next generation of humans have wood to build their tables with.
Cool. So there's like a real sense of time and there's a real sense of intergenerational honor. And you're thinking about renewable, you're interested in circularity on the front end as well, not just in finding uses for your waste product.
Right. I think both is important. Like,
cool.
But big picture as a business is, you know, do no evil and don't take more than you can give, you know. I think that's really important because right now so many big businesses that have made so much money have done it on the backs of so many other people or on the lives of so many other people. And now we're in a situation with global warming and pollution that's really just spiraling out of control because nobody really cares about the waste that their business or their products is creating in the long run. They just care about profits. And, you know, my goal is to make sure that whatever I'm doing in this lifetime, that I'm not leaving the world worse off. I'm leaving it better than how I got it. So, you know, trees luckily they're great sources of oxygen. In fact, they're our best hope for the future, in my opinion. I mean, the best thing we can do right now for the planet is just to plant trees because they'll do everything. They'll fix all of our problems. They'll create, you know, they'll filter the CO2 out of the air. They'll provide habitat. They'll bring, you know, balance to the seasons, to the climate, everything. I mean, trees are miracle workers. So I don't know, I have a real respect for trees and I work with trees, I work with wood. So I think, yeah, I mean, it's a very sustainable material in many aspects because at least here in New York, it's super local. There's actually quite an abundance of trees in upstate New York. So it's not like I'm taking some rare endangered species. I don't work with tropical rainforest woods. I don't work with anything like that. So really it's just, for me, it's like a very sustainable option for furniture because it's hyper renewable, it's local, there's a very low carbon footprint. You know, we're trying whenever possible not to work with commercial manufacturers. We're working with homeowners, we're working with, you know, downed trees from the city. We're trying to be a bit scrappy and go at it in a different way. But there's so much wood up here that's available. It's like, why not use what's local? If you live in the desert, you figure out a way to make houses out of sand. If you live in the forest or nearby forests, you know, you work with, I think that's part of the sustainable approach is working with the materials that are closest in hand to you, just like what Ashwin's doing. It's, you know, finding the things that are unique to your environment and then figuring out, okay, like, how do we build with this?
Cool. Oh, that can be a great segue. Ashwin,
Yeah.
how do you, what's your working definition of circular production?
Yeah, I think circular production is about giving things a second life. It's about giving things a second chance, you know. And I agree with what Ashira said about like not extracting from the environment, but rather like use what is in abundance. So there is, at least from this perspective of like food justice, for instance, you know, there is the knowledge that we all have that we create an abundance of food, you know, in today's society, and at the same time, you know, we waste about like 40% of everything we grow, while that which is like more than enough to feed everyone in the world, and still people go hungry. So we already produce too much. Like that's where we are at right now, and so we got to figure out at least how do you do harm reduction. So I think like circular production is still not like the ultimate answer. It's like harm reduction for what is already happening. And to a certain degree, I also agree with like that kind of like local nature, the importance of like how local manufacturing is so important. But local manufacturing needs to occur organically with, you know, all of its constituents. Let me give you an example. So for instance, breweries in rural places, right, in the US, they don't have this problem of this waste. You know, they feed it to local farm, you know, to like dairy cows. They feed it to chicken, you know, pigs eat it. So it's really nutritious. And they don't have like a lot of these logistical problems because they can take their time. They can collect it, and then the farmer comes and picks it up and takes it to their farm. But here in the city, breweries emerged to serve the local needs of people, right? People need local beer. And but what they didn't bring with them is like farms, you know. So since there are not that many farms in New York City, and you know, like the farmers have to drive like almost 2 hours or more, and they have to pay tolls to get into the city. This is a uniquely urban problem, you know. And so I think fostering the circular production model in a city specifically should try to think about like a product and all of its antecedents and all of its consequential byproducts as well. You know, the circular production model already exists. It's just to a certain degree fractured in the you know, in the urban ecosystems.
Cool. So it sounds like in each of your practices, it's not circularity is not enough, that there's sort of a question of locality, and then there's a question of ecosystem design that makes it complete for you guys. So for our other Made in NYC members on the call, and maybe some students that are on the call, I'd be really curious. Each of you has such a different approach to thinking about waste and circularity. So it's a great pairing. It's really, really interesting. For someone who's starting out, maybe is doing more conventional supply chain, or is just embarking on a project, what would be some first steps you would, or beginning advice you would give to a manufacturer or maker if they're trying to think towards moving towards circular production models? Ashwin, you go first this time.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
We'll go back and forth.
Yeah. So my first advice would be is kind of notice things, literally like look around you, there are, and that's the thing about like design is that waste is designed in such a way where it's hidden from us, even in like an industrial, in industrial design, waste is like whatever, like vacuumed out, or it's like, extracted directly, taken to another location where it's dumped into a truck, and the whole time it's not visible. And so to, actually like poke your nose around and take a look at like what is being thrown away, what is available. And then the second piece of advice is then to, develop relationships with people. Find a way to like make it easy for people to get rid of their waste. Maybe you want to do something like, let people know, like if you're like sourcing, byproducts, let your customers know where it's coming from. People like that, they really like that kind of like transparency and visibility throughout the supply chain. So it's not only about like educating your customers, it's also about like, yeah, letting them make their own discovery, about what is, the nature of whatever the industrial ecosystem around them. Like a lot of our customers, for instance, they've told us like, hey, I didn't even know there was a brewery 3 blocks away in my neighborhood, and but they buy our products. So it's kind of like making that, that kind of like relationship more visible to people. And yeah, even like I also agree with what Ashira said earlier, like be mindful of the own waste you create. Sometimes with a lot of with upcycled ingredients, with like byproducts that you're sourcing if as your raw material, you'll have like a lot of challenges like logistics, so be mindful about like what kind of energy you're using for those logistics. And also be mindful of, yeah, you'll probably create heat and moisture, as byproducts. You'll probably create like some sort of like like our own like flour, for instance. We try to like separate the endosperm from the husk, so we have like a lot of this wasted husk, which we then like actually we give it to like a friend of ours who's like a farmer who uses it like mulch. It forms like a bed for growing mushrooms. So like be mindful of like, yeah, you will also create waste, and you need to find uses for that too.
Cool.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think it really depends also on what you're interested in designing, because the materials can vary so much from discipline to discipline. Like food and the waste created with food, and that whole sector is very different from like industrial design and furniture. I think what I struggle with a lot too right now is there's not a lot of really responsible choices of materials to work with right now as a hard goods designer. Like food is a little bit better in terms of, what you can do there. And even like, look, worst comes to worst and your food waste ends up in a landfill, it's just going to turn into compost and healthy soil eventually. So there's nothing wrong with that, because but it's the plastics that end up in the landfill, it's the metal scraps, it's mostly, I think what worries me the most is the highly engineered plastics that cannot biodegrade and that are seeping into like literally everything in our world, and that are toxic and filled with estrogen and all kinds of nasty things that are, we don't even know yet how that's changing us as a species. Like, I think we're just at the beginning of scratching the surface on that one. But yeah, I mean, I think relationships, creating relationships with people around you are really important. And I think we're in a time where everybody's so digital right now that the in-person connection is really being lost. And I really feel like that's like kind of ruining us. And we need to get back to connecting with people in person. And I know it's been hard because of COVID, but even before COVID, with the amount of digital, with the phones, we are more detached from one another than we've ever been. And I think it's so important for us as a species to connect in the physical. I know from like working in the city for so many years, like we had so much sawdust in the shop always. And I was like, what do I do with all this? And I started meeting local farmers. Like there are farmers who farm rooftop gardens for Gotham Greens, and there's like beekeepers on top of the Navy yards. And we started donating our sawdust to an apiary on top of the Navy yards for their flower garden beds. So, I mean, there are ways to get rid of natural materials like sawdust, and we were mulching our like the trees around our building with our sawdust. Like we were just trying to find ways to use it wherever we could. But it's easy to work with wood waste because, it's a natural material. There's no chemicals in it. It's easy to find a home for that. I think what's harder is finding a home for plastic waste. At least metal and glass you can recycle pretty easily, and there's a very high rate of those materials getting recycled. But what's really the challenging is all of the synthetic fabrics, all of the plastics. That's where I feel like we need to steer away from those things. And I know it's exciting because there's a lot of new materials on the horizon. There's algae knit, and there's Milo unleather, and there's like all these really awesome material scientists developing and working on much more sustainable, eco-friendly fabrics. It's like it can't, and even bioconcretes too, but it's like it can't happen soon enough. Like I'm waiting and waiting and waiting. Like when are these materials going to be available to the building community and the manufacturing community? Because I think we're hungry for it. We want to use it, but none of them are available yet. And so we're stuck using these conventional materials, with a lot of them, they're very unhealthy. So I think whenever possible, we have to try to steer away from them. But in a lot of times, because of like antimicrobial issues now with COVID and XYZ, everything has to be plastic and everything has to be antimicrobial, and you're not left with a lot of options that are healthy and sustainable. So it's a real struggle. And I do hope for like the next generation of designers that all these new emerging materials that are a lot more eco-friendly come on board soon, so that you do have more options,
I agree with that. Sometimes there's just like no option, especially like with like cosmetics packaging, food packaging, any sort of like
Right.
organic materials. You have to put them in a moisture barrier, right? And so if somebody listening to this call invents a biodegradable moisture barrier, let me know and I'll buy your product, because we are looking for a solution, in biodegradable plastic, or just, biodegradable, anything that can prevent moisture from entering your product. Yeah, so that kind of like challenges still exist. Also like logistical challenges, like last mile, cold chain delivery. It's kind of like lacking in a city like New York City. So, that's like another exciting challenge that a lot of different people are trying to solve. And that is going to like change the way we deal with food and food delivery, and also food waste. So yeah, those are some exciting opportunities, that are coming up.
Is that last mile problem specifically show up for you where it's going from the breweries to you?
Yeah, that will be just one of the applications for it. Yeah, but think about things like restaurant delivery, grocery delivery, using like mobile hubs to dispense groceries throughout a city, would be more efficient than what we have currently right now, which is like, like this entire like underclass of like Instacart shoppers, and Uber drivers who are doing that. So, already that exists, that kind of behavior in the way we consume already exists. So now we need to find a way to like make it more, I think that's what the COVID-19, the pandemic proved, is that, people will kind of like, people don't want to go to stores, for instance, to shop for stuff, and it creates this kind of like class difference, between consumers and then the people who are working at the retail and retail delivery. And so, I think that is kind of like an unsustainable model, and people, it's just going to like go up to a point where you have the same sort of like labor issues arising, where this question of whether they're employees or are they independent contractors arises, and what that will result in is retail trying to like do this for itself. And so it'll be interesting to see if like if there are like entrepreneurs in like New York, in cities like New York City, who are interested in kind of like addressing the solution, in a more like but build a more like just system.
Right.
Because a lot of like manufacturing in New York City is consumed locally, but and the way that this connection between I think the consumer and the producer needs to become like more sustainable. Currently it's being like mediated by like retail, which is, it's an unsustainable model. So I think like circular production should also include notions of justice. So that's one of the things that's kind of like missing in like circular production, is like this notion of like labor and justice.
Right. It sounds like part of what I'm taking away from what you're saying is that a model that is building in environmental sustainability that doesn't include social sustainability or include business sustainability will not thrive and succeed, no matter how good the environmental sustainability parts of that are. It has to be.
It's the other way too. Like if you're doing anything that is, you're trying to achieve social justice without environmental justice is just, there's no point. Then what are you building a better world for? Like, for whom? If there is going to be climate change that's going to affect, the fundamental nature of like how of our existence, it's just so intertwined. You cannot separate the two.
And so I guess, so it sounds like you guys have both touched on challenges of communication. Made in NYC has such a strong emphasis, as I'm understanding, on marketing, communication, branding. How do you guys in each of your practices think about that balance between communicating? Transparency has already been used as a word, and educating. Like, how much do you feel like you're finding an audience versus creating one through your communication channels? I mean, like Ashira, you talked about like you're finding these homeowners who have a tree like that they need to be taken down, and you're making furniture for them out of that tree. Is that correct? It seems like an intense story to tell. It's such a personal story. Like, does that audience, are they already out there, those homeowners who know they want that furniture, or do you have to sort of educate them and bring them into that story?
That is definitely more in the educate and bring them into the story category, for sure. Yeah. My business partner, Megan, at New York Heartwoods, which is like the new company that I've partnered with, she's comes from the lumber side of the business, and I come from the design side of the business. And so her knowledge and understanding of lumber is what really drives that conversation. Like, she a lot of times gets like, that's kind of where she tells the story, pulls them in through the tree side, through the understanding of the intimate knowledge of working with trees for her career. And that's definitely a story that we are trying to craft, and we're trying to find a receptive audience to it. Like, we've done a handful of these projects now, but we want to do this exclusively. Like, we just want to do this, I mean, like, this is really what lights us up, is just trying to be as sustainable as possible. And it's not something like our industry has all these certifications. Oh, you're gonna have your tree, it's it's well certified, or it's LEED certified, or the lumber is whatever, USDA, whatever certifications they slap on these things. But these certification processes, they're lengthy, they're expensive, and like, as small independent small businesses, like we don't have the accessibility to those types of certifications. But, doing manufacturing in this way, it's the most sustainable that you can possibly do. It far exceeds any WELL certification or LEED certification, yet we cannot be certified. But anyways, the certification names those, it's not important to us. What we're trying to do is, create a meaningful story between the individual and their connection with the furniture in their home and this tree, and honoring the tree if it has to come down. And like, it's about respect, it's about respect for the environment. It's about like not being wasteful. It's about all of these things that we're sort of having to unlearn in a way as a society. And this happens like one person at a time, and through this happens, this is like a one person at a time thing, and we would definitely like to figure out how to do this more, and how to work with people, and even people in the city who don't have, trees in their backyard. We have lots of sources for trees that have to come down up here for various reasons, that we would also be happy to use in creating furniture for people in the city who just want a more sustainable option and connection to the pieces that go into their homes. But it is tricky as a small business to get that story out there to the masses without, having like the big business marketing dollars. So, I mean, that's like our biggest struggle really.
I think that happens a lot, where a lot of these formal certification-based approaches to sustainability have high barriers to entry for small producers. And so you've done such a great job of decoupling authenticity, transparency from certification. They're not the same thing. And I feel like what you just said about behavior connects to what Ashwin, you were just saying about the buying habits of groceries and TaskRabbits, that like, if you're trying to have people collect furniture and have a different relationship with the waste of their own consumption, there's also a behavior change piece around food and the way we interact with a city landscape. But I don't want to take too much air. Ashwin, how are you guys thinking about communicating? It must be challenging to take a waste product and then sell it as food. Like the storytelling you've done around Rise and Super Flower, like you're so careful with the storytelling you're doing. How do you think about communicating your business?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important to let like the material speak for itself. And so, we kind of lead with the fact that it's plant-based protein, it's sustainable source of protein and fiber and low carbs, and it's healthy, and it's more importantly, I think the reason like a lot of a lot of chefs and bakers use our product is because it smells good, and I think so lead with really the sensory characteristics of the material itself. And it's almost as if like, and by the way, it's sustainable, I think sustainability is more like there to kind of we always put sustainability like and a story like on the back of the packaging, so only those who are curious. So it's more like, I guess finding the customer, but for most people it's like, I think it's about the material. It's really good material, and I think it's about really like finding it. And I really like what Ashira said about like respect. You treat it with respect. That's why it also shaped like the way we kind of like manufacture our flour, for instance, is like a very gentle, low thermal stress way. And that's to preserve as much of the flavor and the texture as possible. And the reason we will figure out this is because of involving our customers in this design process, working with them and creating a better product by constantly involving them at every step. I think that really works. We had a really good relationship with our customers, and they were willing to kind of give us a try in the beginning and help shape the product to become what it is today.
So I have one sort of last question, I think, that is very sincerely held, and I think is unresolved for me. So I really am curious how you guys think about this. We're here in the context of Made NYC. there is this context of business profitability and
Mhm.
financial sustainability to be able to do this work that has all these positive social and environmental impacts. How do you guys think about scale? Because we've talked a lot about how important it is to be local and to
Mhm.
be disaggregated from these like major corporate systems of supply. Like, is there a way to do this work and be financially self-sustaining as a small business without being extractive? Do you do you want to scale your business? Is there an ideal scale? Like, or how do you think about those tensions?
I mean, I'm sure for Ashwin, it might be the opposite end of the spectrum because you can scale very large. You're working with a material that's readily available. You've got tons of it, and I'm sure it's an easy business model to scale up. Whereas with what we do, I mean, we're furniture makers, so we're not looking to be like a big warehouse, IKEA type thing. I guess if you take the furniture to the extreme other end of the spectrum in large scale manufacturing, you get IKEA. So no, I mean, I think our whole thing is staying small, creating a family working environment with our people, treating everybody good, trying to pay everybody fair. I think we really love the small scale, like you go to your local bread for the bread and you go to your furniture, your local furniture maker. Like I sort of love like kind of, I don't know, my romantic vision for the future is more like going back to how things used to be rather than trying to figure out like, oh, how do we like get this thing like this? But then like, I don't know, like I think we like ask for such tall orders when we try to make everything like, how do we make a material super sustainable, but also make it water repellent, but then also make it be able to be breathable. But then we also have to like, what happened to when you just would go to the butcher and you'd get a piece of meat wrapped in like a piece of craft paper, like maybe our ancestors were just doing it right. Like maybe we've just overcomplicated everything so much. So I kind of like the idea of like keeping it small and just figuring out, how to make it work on a small scale. But that's just me, I guess.
Ashwin,
Yeah.
do you want to
Yeah.
expand to other cities that have this waste stream?
Definitely, but I just want to touch upon a point that Ashira just said is, it's the things have become like complicated, right? Things have been like become like way more complicated. Things can be so much simpler, and there's also luckily for us like this, we can point the finger at the person who complicated all of this. There are two like main things. One is that stupid fish which crawled out of the ocean. It should have stayed in there. But the second is venture capitalists. Venture capitalists confuse everything. Their assumptions about the nature of the world shape so much of our reality. It's incredible. And so like, yeah, and I think this also goes to somebody in the chat who was asking for like funding recommendations. Do not take VC money. Do not take VC money. There's so many other options out there. Try your family, your friends, angel investors, people who believe in your mission. There are people out there, find them. And also crowdfunding. I think crowdfunding there are like like online platforms which there are, some of them are kind of fair, but I really think like crowdfunding is like a sustainable option for like funding and growth.
Here, let me just read that question in case there are people in the group who can't see the chat that came through. What are your recommendations for finding funding for circular production projects? Applying for public grants, partnering with universities and students, hope for VC, ? As you just spoke of. So yeah, I think let's stay on that thread for a second. How do we build the ecosystem of patient capital? I mean, I think it also, what you're just saying about VC, I think next to what Ashir was just saying about wanting to stay small is that like, how do you like, you don't have to be a unicorn.
Yeah.
to have a sustainable, in fact, unicorns are not sustainable. Like they
Mhm,
are
mhm.
designed to be explosive in their growth.
Yeah.
So yeah, crowdfunding, friends and families. Any thoughts, Ashira, on how to build the support network?
It's tricky. I mean, for me, I just started very small. I just took a small studio space and I just grew the business one client at a time and through word of mouth and these types of things. And it's in a way like you can't move as fast, you can't get as much done in such a short amount of time, but it's also a more sustainable method because it's better to grow slow and steady and gain the trust of your peers and the people around you. Then yeah, like I've seen so, like, being in this industry, I've seen so many businesses and worked for a few of them, like big design build production houses doing for Nike and Apple, and they've got 20, 30 people on the floor. And I thought, man, like, how do these people do it? You know, wow, like they're really killing it. Like, how do I get there? And then just a year or two later, they would close the doors and they would lay off all their employees. And so, you know, I think it's really deceptive. You see people, it's just like social media. Everybody puts their best photo up. You know, you think everybody's doing a lot better than they really are. I don't know, like as far as funding, I think, yeah, like crowdfund it, try and get the support of your family and your friends. I mean, right now, I guess interest loans are like at an all-time low, so it's not a terrible option to see if you can get a loan from a bank at, you know, 3 or 4%. But if you start small, and you have something that people are really interested in, it might take off and you might not need a lot of money. And you know, it's a kind of a less risky option than being in debt so much money from the jump. That's like it's a little scary,
Mhm.
and kind of a heavy burden to bear. So yeah.
Have either of you guys ever had to say no to an opportunity because it would have forced you to grow faster than you were prepared to grow? Or you'd have to go into debt to pull it off?
Yeah. So, for instance, we were talking with this. This was kind of early. This was like 2018, right? We were talking to this. Like this company, there was a fund which invested specifically in food companies, right? And the first few meetings, they were like all about like, yeah, this is our mission, and we want to support like immigrant entrepreneurs, and we want to support like sustainability and upcycled ingredients and so on and so forth. But as we had more and more meetings and they were doing due diligence, um, it became very clear to us, that they were actually really not interested in the mission at all, and they were quickly like thinking of ways, they were trying to brainstorm ways with us to kind of like figure out like how to like, just grow the brand and like, make an exit. And that's when we realized like, like really working with venture capitalists, it's just not going to allow you to grow slow. It's just not possible, and then it all becomes about like creating this image. That's what Ashir was saying, like about social media. A lot of the time, like when you take venture capitalist money, they're so interested in like creating these kind of like images and vision, of this company that does all these things, where it's kind of like a hollow shell, that just keeps expanding and expanding. And that's like a different way of thinking about what a company is. you know we like to measure, literally like our impact in terms of like tons, how many tons we can rescue and convert into food. And that kind of it's just a different set of assumptions about how we view the nature of work and the nature of a business. And so, really finding like have conversations with people upfront, and ask them about these kind of like assumptions that they have also, not just their values. Values are not enough. Their website and their social media is just artifacts. What we really need to get down is that kind of level of like, what are our different assumptions, and then find people that you're aligned with.
So I know we're at time, so I think I have to hand the baton back to Joanna. Unfortunately, there's one Q&A that I can just speak to super quickly in terms of how can I grow my career towards sustainability, finding job offers in sustainable companies. The quickest thing that comes to mind is that this is like a rapidly expanding space. There are recruiting firms that specialize in filling sustainability roles in existing corporate infrastructure. So see if you can pull those up. But it's definitely a hot space, especially if you want to be in existing industry and be the sustainability person. So if you already have any training or background in that, you're off to a good start. Do we still have Joanna? I was supposed to, yeah, there we go.
I'm back. Thank you guys so much for this wonderful conversation. The recording of this panel will be on our YouTube. Give me one moment. A recording of this panel will be on our YouTube. Some background noise, work from home is how it goes right now. And we will also be putting together a recap article. So any of the questions in the chat that we didn't get to dive in as deep, we will attempt to get answered a bit more in that recap that will go up on our website after the fact. So thank you so much. It feels like these hours go by so quickly. So we appreciate your time. And yeah, this will be Made in NYC's last event before we go big for Made in NYC Week in October. So everyone, please keep an eye out in the coming months for announcements about our 4th annual celebration of New York City's manufacturing and maker community, which is Made in NYC Week 2021. Which will feature both in-person and virtual event options. And so we're really excited about that. And we will have a lot to talk about in the coming months. So I hope everyone had a great night. Have a great rest of your night. Go vote if you haven't already. And if you're in New York City. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you guys.
Bye.